Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got a really exciting panel discussion today. It's going to be on Wi-Fi and 5G, 6G convergence. To delve into this topic, we have an esteemed panel. On the panel, we have Kerry Baker, the lead analyst for North America for Ookla. James Kimery, Vice President of Product Management at Spirent Communications. Bruno Tomas, the CTO of the Wireless Broadband Alliance. And myself, Andrew Spivey at ABI Research. I'll be moderating the panel today. So to kick it off, I think it'd be good if we got a little bit of exploration into what convergence actually is. What are the implications of convergence for the end user? What are the kind of performance enhancements we can expect from convergence between Wi-Fi and 5G, 6G? So perhaps to jump into this question first, Kerry, is there anything? It'd be good if you could share your views on what convergence means for the end user.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, and thanks for having me on the panel here. Certainly a bit of history on convergence is maybe warranted, and I'm sure some of this has been covered on prior sessions too. But convergence used to mean bundling, right? Putting two services together and getting a discount off of that. I could buy wireless and a fixed service from the same company. That was one form of convergence. But if we even recall back in the early days when we had Wi-Fi added to our phones in the first case, and we'd pull into our garage and our mobile call would drop, and then we'd have to reestablish on the Wi-Fi. But then you had the handover happen. That was an early version of network convergence. And we have a lot more of that today where we just seamlessly move in out of Wi-Fi and mobile networks. But is that really convergence too? Is convergence something more than saving on your service or buying the two services from the same provider? And so if there's a convergence narrative that says putting two services together, providing some net benefit above and beyond that. And so some examples of that we might see on the side of like the Spectrum and the Xfinity MVNOs, where they have federated their Wi-Fi hotspots for all of their mobile users to use. So they get an indoor benefit, they get a speed boost benefit. That'd be sort of on a value-added service side of things. But also on the negative side of things, we see this more now, a convergence of networks in terms of delivering resiliency. And so if a network goes down, we had the Verizon outage last week, and so we know that the CBRS networks for the mobile, the cable providers were working a lot harder. I think we've seen now a lot of Starlink as an example, the satellite providers providing a layer of resiliency to a converged network. And so I think that future state of convergence is when the customer doesn't even know, they don't even see or care what network we're on, then we'll be in a converged state of things. So there's from a past to a future type of statement of convergence.
Great, thanks, Kerry. Very insightful. And I'll just remind all the viewers that if they have any questions for any of our panelists, they're free to submit them during the conversation, and I'll read them out to get their views on. But before we get some of those, really interested to hear from Bruno. So of course, the Wireless Broadband Alliance has been doing a lot of work into convergence. It's one of the key themes, I believe, for 2026 for the organization. So could you share some of the initiatives that the Wireless Broadband Alliance has been working on with regards to convergence, and perhaps some of the priorities which you have going forward?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's been a great event, and leading up to this panel about convergence, I think, is a fantastic segue on the why we are even talking about convergence. So from our alliance standpoint, we work with the different stakeholders that try to enable all these very nice products to the end user, like you mentioned. And on previous panels, we always go about what's working, what's not in the technology, then to go to the end user. But if we take a step back, for us as an organization, we try to embrace both Wi-Fi, cellular, and beyond these tools such as IoT and more recently satellite, to make a value proposition that when I buy a phone, the dream of non-techie people is to have the single radio, right? So meaning it's as simple as possible for me as a user to just have my daily journey. Since, I wake up, I use, my Wi-Fi at home, I go into my car, then I go to the office, and I think Kerry mentioned this kind of, conversion, steering, switching. we did some studies where on average a user might swap between 10 to 12 times between Wi-Fi and cellular. So really bluntly, I think we should embrace the resolution of the end user problem on achieving a more close to a single radio. But we know that this is not a short-term thing, right? It's not like there is a single radio access technology that will solve this problem. So we as an organization, our charter is really to deliver different types of convergence that can be, over the top. So if you already invested money on your, cellular, on your Wi-Fi, there's ways for you to get your end user happy, reduce customer calls. I think that's another problem we are trying to solve. I don't get upset and I just think I'll pick up my phone and I'll just stop this membership, or I don't know, with my hospitality provider, or I'll just call my carrier and my own Wi-Fi sucks because I keep steering between both close to the window. So put bluntly, I totally agree that we should think more about the end user. And when we are developing this new wave of convergence that I'll talk later, that should be our premise.
Makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Thanks for the insight there into what the work the Wireless Broadband Alliance has been up to. Perhaps now it'd be nice to hear from James, as obviously Spirent Communications is a leading provider of testing solutions for Wi-Fi, and for kind of 5G devices. So it'd be interesting to understand from yourself, James, how Wi-Fi and 5G testing is currently conducted, and then how would convergence perhaps impact that testing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think it's central to the topic of convergence. Because when I take a step back and I look at the testing, I've been in this industry for many years, the testing industry, and organizations like 3GPP, different operators, the level of testing for cellular devices is really it's quite comprehensive, I think, is the best way that I can say that. And then when 5G sort of happened, and we're in that arc right now, the industry was still sort of focused on cellular and not this vision of a combined environment. In fact, both Wi-Fi and cellular, even today, are largely separate in terms of testing, in terms of standardization. But I think that'll change in the future. And if you think back, I think back years ago when I got my first access point, I got a broadband connection. We went from, I remember the dial-up modem days, and went to Best Buy, bought the cheapest router that they had, and connected it to my broadband connection, and struggled with that a bit, but it worked, and we were happy. And then over time we became more and more reliant on Wi-Fi. And then today, if you look at where we are today, the testing has continued to evolve for Wi-Fi. It's not anywhere close to where it is with cellular, but it's evolved because the service that a broadband provider is evaluated by the consumer in the home is through Wi-Fi. So Wi-Fi is continuing to evolve in terms of testing. And I also believe that the standard Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8 are now at a level from a throughput, latency, even resiliency standpoint, where it makes sense to have more of a convergence with the next generation of cellular, 6G. And when 6G is hopefully, when it's finalized, it will actually accommodate Wi-Fi as opposed to having these streams be separate.
Yeah, fascinating. So we have actually a question from the audience, which leads on kind of perfectly from that last point. So the question is kind of, what do you expect in terms of 6G standardization that might include Wi-Fi? So basically, what elements of 6G standardization will incorporate Wi-Fi into them? Has anyone got any perspective to share there? Anyone?
I'm happy to to do a brief, just, something high level, but if you think about it, in the early days of 5G, 5G was envisioned really to take over everything. And I never got the sense that it was, there was some sort of competition between Wi-Fi and cellular. But if you looked at all the use cases, and it was clear that, there was some overlap. And what's clear today in 2026 is that for indoor wireless broadband, Wi-Fi dominates. 90% of the broadband wireless traffic in the United States goes over Wi-Fi. That's a fact. And that's going to continue into the future. So how do you design a wireless network where indoors it's dominated by Wi-Fi, and the outdoors and the connectivity may be dominated by cellular? That's sort of the context that I look at when I look at these things.
Yeah, I'll add on there too a little bit, and I've had this question from an MNO before too, is when their customer moves into an indoor environment and they're getting onto the Wi-Fi, sort of in the reverse, how do they know that's the best experience for that customer to jump onto the Wi-Fi? There's no communication between the networks about what we'd call layer management in the cellular world, and you can do the same thing there as well. So I think maybe it's just some of the question too, at least now, Wi-Fi 7 is kind of in the can, but as Wi-Fi 8 is being contemplated at the same time as 6G. The standards people are more aware of each other, I think, and I don't know if they're necessarily like sharing dinners and drinks or anything like that just yet, but at least there's conversations and awareness of each other that's happening too, so that provides some hope.
Yeah, so maybe Andy, I can bring some semi-level perspective, and let me put this on the perspective. So the first 6G phone was already announced in Japan. And a few months ago, we saw Wi-Fi 8 announcements. So when this question is done today, we are really comparing Wi-Fi 7 with 5G, which I would consider mature, ecosystems, given the shipment of devices and networks available. So really, we are talking about over-the-top convergence. And there are many solutions in the market that try to cater to solve this. Some we call it tightly integrated solutions that typically come from the 3GPP standards, where you have, those architectures that you can basically have some MNO control, or you just apply the concept of pass point, open roaming, both coexist. You do smart on the operating system, on the identity management. And for me, that's kind of the segue into making it even better with 6G. What changes? It's the opportunity, and we'll release the 6G vision that in fact is being led by some MNOs globally, where they are trying internally to converge the way they address the use cases. So they want to have a more service-oriented set of analyses, and the R&D focus on, okay, what's the ROI for me to have this feature or to enable this use case? And picking up on James' point, if we think about indoors, really the densification that we can have indoor and make that available as a footprint, a quality managed footprint for carriers, it's what can really make a difference. So I would start on that basis and really trying then to close the gap between IEEE, 3GPP. WB is trying to act as the bridge between both. And definitely, standards need to come together, but then the market also need to understand that we need ROI for that investment on tightly integrated networks that lead to convergence.
That makes a lot of sense. And maybe leading off that, Bruno, sort of why do you think this convergence is such a hot topic now? So why are we talking about this sort of 6G Wi-Fi convergence at this point in time? Why weren't we talking about it a few years ago, or why not in a few years' time? Why specifically kind of 2026 is a big year for convergence? Sorry, Bruno.
Exactly, yeah. Andy. No, I was just, thinking that that's the exact, moment when we have this Wi-Fi calling technology, coming to us as something that is a given. And if we think about, this example, Wi-Fi calling as a use case, it was the most successful deployment in history, where we had more than 100 carriers globally going and enabling ePDG that facilitates Wi-Fi calling. So that's amazing. And people seeing this success example, they want to build on top of it. So that's when key motive.
Yeah, and I'll pick up from what Bruno was saying there as well. And if it weren't for the letters AI, convergence was everything people were talking about last year. If you listen to the earnings calls and you do a keyword count, convergence was it, and then AI swept it all away. But again, back to where we started, almost there was no real definition of what that convergence means necessarily, and you would have evolving definitions going through depending on what your plant looked like. If you were fiber heavy, then you would say, FWA, that doesn't mean anything. And if you're cellular, then you might say, we have a convergence this way. So it's moved along. But I do appreciate what Bruno was saying. Like, we've had this for voice over Wi-Fi was a great example of a convergence. And so it's not new. It just continues to evolve.
Yeah, but just to pick up on your earlier point, Kerry, if you had some metrics in terms of user experience, and that user experience was sort of ambivalent to or agnostic to the underlying technology, that would be interesting. And then the test beds, of course, would have to be able to have both cellular and Wi-Fi together. And right now they're largely separate, and they test separate metrics. But then you raise it up a level, and then there's this concept that's been floated around end-to-end testing. End-to-end testing, where all the way from the core network to the end user and evaluating that performance. That's a technique that's available today, but how widespread is that actually available? And I think from a standardization perspective, if these types and kinds of things were actually standardized and maybe even required, the user, either the business customer or the consumer, they greatly benefit from that type of convergence.
Yeah. So Andy, if you allow me, I just wanted to point out, the timing and the 5 things we are seeing on our work programs just for 2026. So why I believe this is the year. So we are solving basically something that is also related with emergency services. So the regulators are much more wanting, if something works on cellular and Wi-Fi keeps getting better and better, we should have some interoperability, or at least mission critical should work across both mediums. Then we have the edge roaming cases. So that is becoming also a key requirement and even mandatory for some of the stretch use cases we have. Satellite is coming into play. So imagine once you went over from NTN to Wi-Fi, it will be the same problems as we have today with 5G. I mentioned Wi-Fi calling, and then also the Wi-Fi DAS, or making it kind of something more integrated. So basically we have just 5 programs on this 6G working group, and that's why I believe people is much more wanting to make it work. And we have a time span given the standards timing of 2030. So that's roughly 5 to 6 years until we start seeing something in the field.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely a lot of excitement about it in the industry, and a lot of focus as well on this topic currently. So we've got a very interesting topic, a very interesting question from attendees. So they're asking about one of the limits they see to convergence is between Wi-Fi and cellular is in the end user equipment. So like your phones, your laptops. So they believe obviously you've got separate networks. So basically, some devices are using cellular, some devices are using Wi-Fi, and you have access points which are also separate. So some of them are obviously cellular, some of them are Wi-Fi. When can you expect to see converged access points? And then that prevents having to build separate networks, which is one of the main kind of pain points, I suppose, in the industry. So yeah, has anyone got kind of any insight or any perspective to share on that question there?
I'm sure every one of us would have something to say. I'll kick off this one a little bit, because like coming from the wireless industry, we always know when there's a new generation of wireless, because the wireless carriers have multi-million, billion-dollar marketing campaigns out there to try to get us to upgrade our gear. And so that's part of it, is the upgrade cycle for the equipment, whether it's the CPE or the handset. Those things are different cycles and different providers. When I updated my router in my home, that came, through part of my lease. I lease that router. I don't buy it, but other people do different things too. So the Wi-Fi side of that on the in-home environment is a different upgrade cycle from the mobile phone. And then, of course, the enterprise angle of that too, where we usually see more tech adoption, especially in the enterprise space. Longer sales times, but then those are all en masse. But then all the sensing and all the other radios that have to be along with that too. So that's not a good answer. That's just like that's just the reality of it now. But I'll pass to my colleagues here for better insights than that.
Well, I mean, from a Wi-Fi perspective, I think, I mentioned this earlier, but if you look at where, Wi-Fi 6 was a big step, and Wi-Fi 6E was even bigger step because of the 6 gigahertz spectrum. 1.2 gigahertz of spectrum was released, not globally, but different countries are working on gaining access to that 6 gigahertz band. That was big. That was big. It came at a time where we had a pandemic and we were all working at home. It's when Wi-Fi really became the workhorse, or it definitely saved a lot of us who were working from home at that time. And then, you look at what Wi-Fi 7 gives you indoor rates that are really unprecedented and borrows technologies from 5G, like MLO, multi-link operation, is similar to carrier aggregation and LTE and 5G. And then, Wi-Fi 8 is more about, there's many different features, but it's more about robust communication and then having multiple access point coordination. And the reason I went through those three evolutions is because if you look at Wi-Fi and your access point today, my home I have a small home and I have three access points because I want to be able to work seamlessly and have great Wi-Fi whatever room that I'm in and I'm working. So I think what's happened is from that in-house perspective is the equipment is going to evolve, and it's going to evolve from Wi-Fi 7 to Wi-Fi 8, and the benefits of those technologies indoor can't be discounted. You should get really robust coverage, much better than you have today when these technologies become deployed, in just the way that standards roll out. And then you layer on what about 6G is again looking at it at a higher level, at maybe an access layer as opposed to inside the house. I think that's probably where the best place to really work on this convergence problem, because I can see that the access points that people are going to deploy in the future, they're going to be very sophisticated. They're going to look more like base stations that are deployed today for 5G. And oh, by the way, they can be AI enabled to even provide better coverage indoors.
Yeah, so maybe, Andy, I would say, based on our progress over the years, combining radios on both cellular and Wi-Fi is unlikely. However, there's quite a number of success stories blending, Wi-Fi and IoT. So we have, projects around Wi-Fi bundling IoT in the same box, combining USB sticks, and that creates some synergies. Maybe the way I would kind of approach this is, we believe that every single equipment, independently of the radio, might have to become with a mandatory set of software that allows for smart management. In the phase one, like I mentioned, can be related with emergency services. So imagine whenever you ship an access point, on a base station, you should have a universal, code that you can use to give access either to priority services, first responders, in a phase two, maybe to those users. But I think what changes is you have for the first time a mechanism where you can have a management smart system that is able to steer the users and make smart policy decisions. So today, the most valuable asset we get from our carriers is, can you tell me in real time if my user in that specific location, either home, enterprise, or in the public space, should remain connected to cellular, or should I switch that user to Wi-Fi, right? And once people, oh, I would love to manage and control, everything, we have something we didn't talk here yet today, which is the device vendors. So we buy those devices. Sometimes we can buy them, from the carrier, but most of the devices today, I would say they are aftermarket, and there is lots of autonomy for the user to make its own decisions. And not only that, but we have the proprietary, or at least non-so open source algorithms inside those operating systems. And I'm talking about Android, iOS, Windows, and they are trying to solve a problem. They are trying to make the users like the experience on their phones. And because they didn't get a solution over more than a decade, they are trying their best with the data they get on the UE. However, what I believe we are trying to change with our QoS, QoE, access network metric is to create an engine where everyone contributes data, anonymous data, and depending on the service provider, the owner of the identity, because this can be my Marriott credential, or my AT&T SIM card, or my Boeing Wireless Airports Passpoint profile. They all manage the user. So what I believe is, for equipment standardization or aggregation, it's really that common layer that might be Passpoint open roaming that solves this problem for everyone, creating more synergies.
Great, thanks Bruno. So next, I've got another very interesting attendee a question from our audience. It's asking about how we actually measure for the end user, how we measure convergence. So how do we measure kind of, in this handover scenario, how do we actually have kind of metrics to see what is a good converged solution and what is not a good converged solution? So they give the example of when someone's on a WhatsApp video call maybe, and they go from Wi-Fi to 5G or 6G. How are we doing that testing? So Kerry might have some views there, given your work at Ookla.
A little bit, but I know James is from the test world, but I will point out the Root Metrics logo right here as well. And we do a drive test service. We haven't as focused on the Wi-Fi yet, but that does make a lot of sense, of course, based on this conversation, that we should be testing across those sort of things. And on the Ookla data side, based on a device IDs, and there's no proprietary information tracking here, but you can track a device ID across a cellular and a Wi-Fi network. In fact, I published an article a year ago on the cable networks, the MVNO behavior when they're in the Wi-Fi spot. And so you can see the converged experience benefit on a speed test perspective of those sort of things. So there's just a couple of limited examples, but we need to do more on this for sure. But I'm going to pass to James as our expert on the network testing side. Yeah.
Well, we actually have products that do that type of thing. We have, so it depends on what the user experience can be broken down into audio, video, and data. And then we have separate products that look at each one of those. And then typically in things like audio, there are standards available that measure audio quality, video quality. There's scoring that can be used to assess over any broadband network. And then data, of course, looking at data throughput over a multitude of these different wireless networks is something that is being done. But as I mentioned, most of these are very focused on cellular. There's not as much I wouldn't say interest. That's a harsh word, but we don't have as much demand, perhaps is the best way to say that, on the Wi-Fi side. But in reality, just my 2 cents worth, I believe that these networks will converge. It makes too much sense. There's too much benefit. Even the roaming that we have today is fairly clunky, and I think that will only improve in the future as these standards converge.
Yeah. So I think, building on the testing item, we as an organization, we try to be very practical. So when we start the working group, we really need to deliver, either a guideline or a standard or some type of gap that we want to solve. And personally, I really encourage all the teams to come up with POCs and trials. And one example on how difficult it is to test convergence, I see there was a question here from an attendee around ITSSS and some of the work done in the WBA, and that's a perfect example. So we had a full working group working on this Wi-Fi cellular convergence, building on the 3GPP-centric approach, and that is one technology that was proposed as a way to bridge, both worlds. What were the gaps that we identified? Is that Wi-Fi, in the words of our members, needed to be seen more as a, first-class citizen type approach. And for that, we needed really to have, architecture discussions, use case definitions, and see how we could elevate the role that Wi-Fi would take in such policy enforcement environment to deliver, some experience-driven steering rather than radio-centric decisions. Because let's be honest, if we just look to the KPIs and we steer the user, that's not good enough. We talked about residential, and we talked about some questions here about video experience, and it's not only about what we see from the packets and the tagging, but also what's, for instance, going to be the latency if I move around a certain space. So everything needs to be much more intelligent, and by doing that work, we liaise with the 3GPP, but we didn't get enough equipment to run a trial, to run a real world end-to-end trial. And that's probably a fundamental shift where this was a great idea. We are still working, and I believe we are going to have some prototype equipment, but the motivation then for the RAN vendors to develop these features and to put some skin on the R&D teams needs to improve, right? Otherwise, we can have more and more architectures that don't see, some success. And that's a mind shift, right, that we are trying to put forward.
Mm.
So while we were on the topic of testing, there was one question that was directed at you, James, from the audience. And the attendee was asking about kind of what procedures would have to change when we go forward and look at these kind of convergence solutions and we do the testing for them. What procedures would have to change from an engineer's perspective, skills, different tools they might need. If there's any insights you can provide there? Yeah.
It depends on what you want to test, right? If you want to test a handover roaming from one technology to the next, you could look at the time that it took to roam. You could look at the voice quality during that transition. If you're watching a video, you can look at the video quality, and then you can look at throughput, and then packet error rate on those as well. As Bruno sort of hit the nail on the head, I think there are types and kinds of solutions out there, but it does really require an investment. And those types and kinds of investments, evolution needs to happen. And, as I said earlier, I believe with standardization on some of these things, definitely people smarter than I am, they could come up with a set of tests that could be mandatory, could be optional, where these two technologies, wireless access technologies, are converged and measure user experience at some level. Again, it could be latency, it could be throughput, it could be video quality, whatever metric that is. But those technologies, they exist today, but putting them together and having a test standard that everybody agrees on, that's a good, that work still hasn't been done. Still very much piecemeal, and it's still very much vendor specific or customer specific.
Yeah, I'll add on a thought here too that you prompted in my head earlier, James, too, is when you think about testing of wireless networks, cellular networks, you have a competitive market dynamic that drives some, well, two things. It's more complex technologically because you have mobility, you have people moving around, certainly too, but then you also have this competitive market dynamic that says you need to put forth the best wireless network in order to get new customers or retain customers. Otherwise, they'll go switch to someone else. You don't have as strong of a you have more like kind of that local monopoly of who your provider might be when it comes to the fixed side. It's gotten better with fiber overbuild and some things like that, but that choice wasn't there driving that sort of market characteristic that said, hey, this is a competitive dynamic that we have to enforce from putting forth our best network effort. That's not to say that the networks weren't good enough on the Wi-Fi side anyway, because it's good enough, then that reduces that the impetus to churn on the customer perspective. But again, just to beat that horse once more, a competitive market dynamic does a lot for that.
Sure does.
We only have a few minutes left. There is one question, sort of burning question I have, which I'd really like to hear the views from the audience. So obviously 5G, it was introduced obviously 7-8 years ago. It was hyped up as sort of a technology which would perhaps be in competition with Wi-Fi and perhaps would replace Wi-Fi in the future. Didn't come to pass. And 5G private networks as well, which was one of the kind of key markets for 5G technology, never really took off. So I guess it's kind of two questions in my statement there. But the first one is about, do you think we're going to go towards an era of greater collaboration between Wi-Fi and cellular? And then the kind of second part of my question was, do you think with the arrival of 6G and convergence with Wi-Fi, could that revitalize the market for sort of cellular private networks? So we'll see 6G private networks be revitalized because it's actually going to be incorporated or converged with Wi-Fi. So yeah, anyone is free to jump in there if they've got views on either of those questions.
Yeah, so maybe I can comment, Andrew, and it's probably one of the key messages we would like to bring is, I believe we were never so close from achieving the vision of convergence, but the time and the window might quickly vanish, in the sense that we have now all these on the seller side, all you can eat data plans. We have eSIMs blossoming, multi-identities. Wi-Fi is getting better on identity management. And then we have those very stretched use cases. So bluntly, to your question, what we are trying to do and bring the members together is all about, can we have a common understanding and some KPIs on how to make these decisions? And private seller, I think, there have been success stories, and there are use cases like, industrial IoT, for instance. And we have some work. Today, we launched an enterprise security paper around security for private 5G networks. And the reason is, if a CISO or an IT director is able to manage security across both networks on a management system that is centralized, everything runs smoother. So maybe that's the concept we want to apply. Whatever works on each side should be shared, and hopefully build best practices that help these players that are investing and making RFPs to have the better possible decisions. So that's really our focus. And the working group will deliver a blueprint on 6G and Wi-Fi requirements towards our May Congress in Dallas. So that's kind of my invitation, and hopefully we'll keep trying to answer that question.
Well, I mean, I think that, in terms of private networks, in some geographies around the world, they've been very successful in 5G. But, I go back, the cellular today, 5G and Wi-Fi are different. And they're really different use cases. I can't stress that enough. Indoors, Wi-Fi has really taken some significant steps on introducing a wireless standard, or an evolved wireless standard, that will enhance user experience. No question about it. 5G is also, evolved in that direction. But as Kerry said, because of the mobility case, it's a much harder problem to solve mobility and trying to get the signal indoors and propagate and throughout your home or business. And so, I think in the future, is it an or question, or is it and? And I think it's and. I think there would be cases where Wi-Fi and cellular will solve applications better, faster, and cheaper than cellular alone or Wi-Fi alone. And there will be applications where cellular does a phenomenal job, and Wi-Fi can't compete. There'll be so I guess my message is, I think in terms of evolution, these standards have to come together at some level. And I think the industry is sort of waiting on it, and forcing one standard in a square peg and a round hole, when people are after throughput, latency, ubiquitous coverage, resiliency, security. A number of things go into those purchase decisions and cost. And so if there's a solution out there that can meet those consumer or business needs, it could be one, it could be the other, or it could be both.
I can wrap in 10 seconds too. From my perspective, it's
Yeah.
cost per bit determined by owner economics, and then how do we get the end-to-end QoE?
Well said.
Great. Well, yeah, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I know we can talk about this topic all day, or for several days probably, but unfortunately, we have to wrap up the session now. But thank you. Well, thanks to all three panelists for your really great insights there. And thanks also to the attendees for your time. I hope you've had a great, I hope you all enjoyed the panel discussion.
Super. Thank you.